How would you feel if your own child abandons you because you are poor and goes to live with your husband's rich mistress, the woman responsible for your marital problems? This is the sad story of a poor woman who was abandoned by her own daughter. How dare you show up at my graduation dressed like a mad woman? Do you think this is your village festival? Remide said to her mother Joke, whose eyes were now filled with tears. The laughter of her classmates and their well-dressed parents seemed to get louder, echoing in her ears. Joke's hands trembled as she watched her own daughter cling onto the arms of her father's side chick, her eyes filled with the kind of hurt that only a mother could feel. She stood there, heartbroken, as she stared at her daughter Iremide, who ignored her completely and introduced her father's side chick Adesua to her friends as her mother. Iremide did not care how hurt her mother felt by this. She was so ashamed of her mother and always wished that Adesua was her own mother. Adesua was not only wealthy, but extremely beautiful and fashionable. She always took Iremide shopping and even allowed her to move into her mansion to live with her after Iremide pleaded to be allowed to live with her father and Adesua instead. The same Adesua who made Iremide's father to leave her mother Joke a few years ago, leaving Joke to cater for Iremide all by herself. Joke, despite being so poor, did all she could to care for her daughter alone. Iremide's father Damola never cared about his daughter as he left all responsibilities to Joke after leaving her for his side chick Adesua. He rarely called, and when he did, it was to flaunt his new life with Adesua, not to check on Iremide's well-being. Joke worked long hours as a market woman, selling vegetables under the harsh sun, her body growing weak with every passing day. Yet, she never complained. She saved every penny for Iremide's school fees, books and uniforms, sacrificing her own needs for the sake of her own daughter. Joke even developed an ulcer from the many times she went without food just to make sure that her daughter Iremide always had something to eat, but none of that seemed to matter now. To Iremide, Adesua, her father's side chick, represented everything she had always wanted: glamour, luxury, and a life free from the embarrassment of poverty. As Joke stood there, heartbroken and dejected, she wished that her daughter would see how much love she had in her heart for her. Despite how badly Remedy had treated her, Joke could not bring herself to hate her own daughter. Remedy, however, felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of finally severing ties with the part of her life that she had grown to so despise. She had no space for her mother in this new life of privilege, as the humiliation her mother brought her way was too much for her to bear. Joke stood frozen in place, her world crumbling before her eyes. She had worked tirelessly to give Iremide a better life, ensuring that her daughter had all that she needed, depriving herself of the good life. Her love had been a quiet, sacrificial one, full of late nights and early mornings, but now all she could feel was the sting of rejection. The child she had raised with so much love had replaced her with another woman, one who would never know the weight of struggle in her life. As Iremide laughed with her friends, introducing Adesua as her real mother, Joke could feel her heart shatter in a million pieces. She bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to escape her eyes, but the pain was too much to bear. Iremide, Joke whispered, her voice barely audible, as if calling out her daughter's name would somehow bring her back to her senses. But Iremide didn't hear her calling, or maybe she chose not to. She was too lost in the glamour of Adesua's world, a world Joke could never give to her. With tears pouring down her face, Joke turned and walked away from the graduation ceremony, her once hopeful steps now heavy with sorrow. Iremide, clinging onto Adesua's arm, didn't even notice her mother leave. She was too caught up in the joy of being surrounded by wealth, status, and the acceptance of her peers. The part of her that ached for her mother's embrace was buried deep beneath layers of shame. Iremide had always yearned to live the good life. Seeing all her wealthy friends in school, Iremide desperately wanted to be acknowledged by her friends. She pleaded with her father to allow her move in with him, and her father, after consulting his side chick Adesua, agreed for her to move into their mansion with them. Iremide was so overjoyed to hear this. She couldn't wait to leave her mother's humble home behind. The small rundown house, with its peeling walls and creaky doors, was a reminder of everything she wanted to escape. She had always resented how her mother struggled to make ends meet, how their meals were simple, and how they couldn't afford new clothes like her friends could. To Iremide, living with her father and Adesua meant freedom, a life of glamour and luxury, far from the embarrassment of poverty. When Iremide moved into Adesua's mansion, it felt like stepping into a different world. The house was enormous, adorned with sparkling chandeliers, plush furnitures, and expensive art. Adesua took her shopping, bought her designer clothes, and introduced her to high society events. Iremide felt like she was finally living the life that she deserved. She loved the attention she received from her new friends and the admiration that came with her father's wealth and Adesua's status. For the first time, she felt like she belonged, but beneath all the glamour, something was missing. At first, everything seemed perfect. Adesua treated Iremide like her own daughter, doting on her, buying her gifts and taking her to fancy places. But as time passed, Adesua's warm exterior began to fade, revealing the cold, controlling woman beneath. One morning, Adesua informed Iremide that she was expecting some visitors. She ordered her to lock herself up in her room and not make a sound. Surprised, Iremide asked why, but Adesua's cold stare silenced her. "This is my house, Iremide," Adesua said sharply, her tone harsh and condescending. "You live here because I allow it, but don't think for a moment that this is your house. Stay out of sight until I say otherwise." For the first time, Iremide felt like an intruder in the mansion she had come to think of as her home. She obeyed, retreating to her room, confused and hurt. The visitors arrived, and Iremide could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses from behind the closed doors. The once welcoming home now felt suffocating. Alone in her luxurious room, Iremide began to realize that the life she had chosen wasn't as perfect as it seemed. The next day, Iremide's friends came visiting. Iremide was so excited to show off the mansion to her friends, who were so shocked to see how big the house was. Her friends marveled, their eyes wide with awe as they explored the luxurious space. "Wow, Iremide, you really live here?" one of them asked, their tone filled with envy. Iremide smiled, basking in the admiration. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the validation she had longed for, the proof that she had escaped her past and was now part of the life she had always envied. Just as they were admiring the view from one of the balconies, Adesua appeared, her eyes cold and disapproving. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice sharp. Iremide's heart sank as she saw the familiar look of disdain on Adesua's face.
I invited my friends over this one.
Iremide said nervously, her voice faltering. Adesua's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Your friends? Did you ask my permission before turning this house into a playground? Don't forget your place, Iremide." Her words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and Iremide's friends exchanged uneasy glances. Humiliated, Iremide swallowed the lump in her throat. "I'm sorry, Adesua," she whispered, trying to keep her composure. Adesua, without saying much, walked out on them angrily, informing her not to let her friends overstay their welcome. Iremide stood frozen, her face burning with embarrassment. Her friends, once full of admiration, now looked at her with a mix of sympathy and awkwardness. The mansion, that had seemed so glamorous just moments ago, now felt suffocating, and Iremide wished she could disappear. Iremide tried to ignore the growing tension, convincing herself that this was the price she had to pay for living the life that she wanted. She endured all the harsh words and cold stares, believing that the luxury and status were worth it, but deep inside, The glamour began to lose its luster. One day, the pressure from Adesuwa's constant belittling, the strain of pretending everything was perfect, and the weight of guilt over abandoning her mother finally took its toll. Iremide fell gravely ill. At first, it seemed like a simple fever, but it quickly worsened. Iremide became weak, bedridden, and unable to keep up with her usual routine. Her condition deteriorated, and she found herself confined to her room, alone and without anyone to comfort her. Despite her worsening state, Adesuwa paid little attention. She merely glanced at Iremide in passing and didn't bother about her. "I don't have time to be stressed over a spoiled child's illness," Adesuwa had said to Damola, Iremide's father, when he asked if she had checked on her. "She'll be fine. Children exaggerate." Adesuwa's cold indifference hurt Iremide more than the sickness itself. She had hoped that maybe, in her moment of weakness, Adesuwa might show some warmth, but all she received was neglect. Days passed, and Iremide's condition worsened. Alone in her room, struggling to breathe, she longed for the comfort of her mother's arms. Meanwhile, far across town, Joke was in her small rundown house when she felt a sudden overwhelming sense of dread. It was as though something deep inside of her was telling her that her daughter Iremide was in trouble. Though they hadn't spoken in months, the bond between mother and child was something that transcended distance and silence. "Iremide," she whispered to herself, her chest tightening with fear. Without a second thought, Joke left her small house and rushed towards the mansion where her daughter now lived. The journey was long and the sky darkened with clouds, but Joke's determination carried her through. By the time she reached the mansion's gate, the rain had begun to pour, drenching her thin clothing and making it difficult to see through the heavy downpour. She approached the gate, pounding on it desperately. "Please, I need to see my daughter," Joke cried, her voice breaking. "Iremide, my daughter, is she okay?" The security guard at the gate barely looked at her. "You can't come in here," he said with a stern expression. Madame Adesuwa gave strict orders not to let anyone in without her permission. "Please," Joke begged, her voice shaking with emotion. "I know something is wrong with Iremide. I'm her mother. I need to see her. Please," she begged. The security guard crossed his arms unmoved. "I'm sorry, but those are the rules. You should go home," he said to Joke, who refused to leave. She stood at the gate, her body trembling from the cold rain, not caring about the fact that she was asthmatic. Her breath became ragged, but she couldn't bring herself to turn away. The thought of Iremide suffering alone in the mansion tore at her heart. Hour after hour, Joke stood in the rain, pleading with the guard. "Please, let me see my daughter. She needs me." But the security guard remained firm, ignoring her cries as though they meant nothing. As the rain soaked through her clothes, her asthma began as she struggled to catch her breath. Her chest tightened painfully, but still, she didn't leave. She couldn't. The love she had for her daughter was stronger than any physical pain, stronger than any humiliation or rejection. "Iremide," Joke said, holding her chest, which was now tightening, her voice barely audible. "I'm here for you. I'll always be here for you," she said as she slumped at the gates of the mansion, collapsing into the cold, muddy ground. Her frail body weakened by the rain, and her asthmatic struggle finally gave in. She lay there, soaked and trembling, barely conscious, whispering her daughter's name in the rain. The security guard glanced at her and yelled out for help. Inside the mansion, Iremide, lying in her bed, sensed something was terribly wrong. She looked out of her window and caught sight of a frail-looking figure lying under the rain at the gate. The dress looked familiar, and Iremide found her heart racing to realize that it was her mother, a woman who she knew avoided the rain at every given opportunity because of her asthma. She was drenched in the rain, collapsed on the floor, and Iremide knew that it was all because of her. She had been so consumed by her desire for a life of wealth and glamour that she had cast aside the one person who had truly loved her. Mama, she whispered, her voice cracking as tears filled her eyes. She stumbled down the stairs, ignoring the sharp pains in her body, and rushed towards the door. She burst out of the mansion and into the rain, her legs wobbling as she made her way towards the gate. The sight of Joke drenched and barely breathing, lying motionless in the mud, broke Iremide's heart. Mama, she cried, collapsing beside her mother. Her trembling hands reached out to touch Joke's face. It was cold to the touch, and panic surged through her body. Mama, wake up, please wake up. Iremide's voice was choked with sobs as she shook her mother gently, her tears mixing with the rain that poured relentlessly down on them. I'm so sorry, Mama. Please forgive me. I never should have abandoned you. Her words came out in desperate gasps, filled with regret and sorrow. Father, she called out repeatedly as her father rushed out to see the horrific sight. He was about taking Adesua for her nail appointment and was shocked to see Joke lying down unconscious in front of their gate. Filled with so much panic, he tried to assist her into the car when Adesua walked out and asked what he was doing. We need to get her to the hospital, he said to Adesua, who asked if he was crazy. Have you forgotten about my nail appointment? She asked Iremide's father, who hesitated for a moment, caught between his loyalty for Adesua and the sight of his wife lying unconscious on the ground. Iremide's voice broke the silence as she pleaded with her father to help.
Father, please help Mama.
Her face was wet with both tears and rain as she pleaded. Damola, in that moment, remembered the sacrifices Joke had made for him in her life and how she abandoned her family's wealth just to be with him. Joke's father, before his demise, was an extremely wealthy man. Damola was his driver who had worked with him for over 5 years. He realized that Damola was having an affair with his daughter and did everything within his power to separate them. But Joke was head over heels in love with Damola. So one morning, Joke's father accused Damola of stealing a huge sum of money from his car. He got some hefty boys to deal mercilessly with Damola, who swore that he didn't take the money. Joke, on seeing what her father did to Damola, went into her father's safe and took all the money that he had. This was the money that she used to abscond with Damola, believing that her father did all he did to Damola because of his disapproval of their relationship. Little did she know that Damola truly stole the money from her father's car. Shortly after they absconded, her father noticed that his money was gone, and this led to a heart attack that finally ended his life. Joke and Damola, not knowing what had happened, began to live their lives with her father's money. Joke handed the entire money over to Damola to keep, seeing how young she was at the time. But Damola squandered it all on women, leaving Joke with nothing but the harsh realities of life. When the money finally ran out, Damola's affection for Joke dwindled and his attention shifted to other women. This he did even when he realized that Joke was pregnant with his child. He neglected her, subjecting her to a life of poverty, whilst he went after rich women like Adesua, who could sustain the life that he so desperately yearned. Joke raised her daughter alone, whilst Damola lived his life, not caring about them. As Damola stood there, watching the rain pour down on Joke's body and hearing Iremide's desperate cries, memories flooded his mind, memories of Joke's sacrifices for him. She had given up everything for him, her family, her wealth, her comfort. She had chosen him over her own family, betraying them, and now, in his pursuit of selfish desires, he had thrown her aside. His heart clenched with guilt as he realized how far he had fallen. Adesua's impatient voice cut through the air again. Damola, don't waste your time on her. Let's go. We are already late. She crossed her arms in annoyance, but Damola could not move. He looked down at Joke, the mother of his child, and at Iremide, their daughter. broken and pleading. A wave of shame washed over him. For years, he had convinced himself that wealth and status were all that mattered. But standing there, watching the woman who had once loved him so deeply suffer, he realized just how wrong he had been. No, Damola said finally, his voice firm. He turned to Adesua, the woman he had once thought could give him everything he wanted. I won't leave her like this. Adesua's eyes fled with anger. What? Are you choosing her over me? Damola didn't respond. Instead, he bent down gently, lifting Joke's frail body into his arms. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow. We are going to the hospital now, he said, ignoring Adesua's furious glare. Iremide let out a sob of relief, rushing to the car as her father carefully placed her mother inside. Thank you, father, she whispered, her voice trembling. As they sped towards the hospital, the rain beat heavily against the car, but inside, the weight of guilt pressed down on both Damola and Iremide. Neither spoke, their minds consumed with fear and regret. Iremide held her mother's hand, whispering apologies and prayers, begging her to stay alive. Mama, please don't leave, Iremide whispered, her voice breaking. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I need you, Mama, I need you. Damola's grip on the steering wheel tightened. The road ahead was blurry. Through the tears he refused to let fall. How did he let it come to this? He had chased after wealth and status, abandoning the one person who had truly loved him. Hang on, Joke. Please hang on, Damola whispered to himself as they approached the hospital. At the hospital, doctors rushed Joke into the emergency room. Iremide and Damola waited anxiously in the reception, the minutes dragging on like hours. The tension was unbearable. Iremide clung to her father's side, her sobs quiet but steady as they both prayed for a miracle. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a doctor emerged, his expression serious but not hopeless. She's stable for now, he said, addressing both father and daughter, but she's very weak. The combination of her asthma and the prolonged exposure to the rain put a severe strain on her body. She'll need time to recover, but we are doing everything we can. Relief washed over Iremide, and she let out a shaky breath, collapsing into the nearest chair. Thank God, she whispered. Thank God. Damola, too, exhaled deeply, the guilt in his chest loosening slightly. Can we see her? He asked the doctor, his voice low and thick with emotion. Yes, but only for a few minutes. She needs rest, the doctor replied. When they entered Joke's hospital room, the sight of her lying so still in the bed, hooked up to machines, broke Iremide's heart all over again. She rushed to her mother's side, taking her hand gently in her own. Mama, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I was blinded by things that don't matter. I hurt you and I don't deserve your love. But please, Mama, come back to me. Joke's eyes fluttered open. Weak but conscious, she looked at her daughter with a faint, loving smile. Her voice, barely a whisper. Iremide, she breathed, her voice trained. You're here. Iremide nodded, tears pouring down her face. I'm here, Mama. I'm never leaving you again. Joke's fingers curled weakly around Iremide's hand, and despite the pain in her body, her eyes were filled with the same unconditional love she had always had for her daughter. I forgive you, my child. I always will. Those words shattered the last bit of pride that had held Iremide's heart captive. Thank you, Mama, she sobbed, resting her head on the bed beside her mother's hand. I love you so much. As Iremide wept beside her mother's hospital bed, Joke's breathing grew shallow, the rise and fall of her chest weakening. The beeping of the machines filled the room with a haunting rhythm, each sound a painful reminder that time was slipping away. Damola stood quietly at the foot of the bed, his heart heavy with guilt and regret, unable to hold back the tears that finally escaped his eyes. Iremide, Joke whispered again, her voice barely audible. Take care of yourself. Remember I always loved you. more than anything. Mama, no, Iremide cried, clutching her mother's hand tighter. Don't leave me. Please, I'm so sorry for everything. I need you. We need you. Joke's eyes fluttered shut, her body trembling one last time before going still. The steady beeping of the heart monitor became a flat line, and in that moment, Iremide's world shattered. Mama! She screamed, shaking her mother's hand as if her touch alone could bring her back. Mama, wake up! Please wake up! Her cries echoed through the hospital room as nurses rushed in, trying to pull Iremide away from the bed, but she clung on, desperate, her heart breaking with every second that passed. Damola collapsed into the chair behind him, covering his face with his hands. The weight of his choices, of everything he had done to the woman who had loved him unconditionally, crashed over him in waves. He had lost her forever. The drive back to the mansion was silent. Iremide's sobs had subsided, but the pain lingered heavily in the air. Both Damola and herself were broken, their hearts filled with a grief too deep for words. When they finally arrived at the gates of the mansion, a new shock awaited them. Their belongings were scattered outside, suitcases lined up by the gate. Confused and still raw from their loss, Damola stepped out of the car and approached the security guard, his voice hoarse. What is this? Why are our things out here? The guard, unable to meet Damola's eyes, muttered, Madame Adesuwa's orders. She said you and Miss Iremide are no longer allowed in. Iremide's heart sank as she glanced up at the mansion, her eyes catching sight of another man standing in the doorway. He was holding Adesuwa's hand, laughing as if nothing had happened. The woman who had once promised them everything had moved on without a second thought, replacing them just as easily as she had discarded a used item. No, Iremide whispered, barely able to process what was happening.
Father, what do we do?
Damola stood frozen, his mind reeling from the betrayal. Everything he had sacrificed, everything he had built with Adesuwa, had crumbled before his eyes. He had lost his family, his home, and now his dignity. Without a word, he grabbed the suitcases. We go back, he finally said, his voice hollow. We go back home. As they made their way back to the rundown house that Joke had once called home, Iremide sat in silence, her tears long dried, but her heart heavy with remorse. The house, which she had once viewed with disdain, now felt like the only place left where she could find peace. But it was a peace forever tainted by the absence of the one person who had loved her unconditionally. When they arrived, the familiar creak of the door echoed as they stepped inside. The small humble space felt emptier than ever without Joke's presence. Iremide sat on the old worn-out couch, her eyes scanning the room. The kitchen, where her mother had prepared countless meals for her. The small dining table, where they had shared quiet dinners. It was all the same, yet everything had changed. Mama's gone, she whispered to herself, the reality of it sinking in deeper with every passing moment. She's really gone. Damola sat beside her, his face etched with grief. I failed her, Iremide. I failed your mother, and I failed you. For the first time in a long while, Iremide reached for her father's hand, holding it tightly. We both did, father, she said, her voice soft but resolute. But I think Mama knew. She forgave us. She always forgave us. The house was quiet, save for the distant sounds of life outside. But within its walls, a father and daughter sat together, bound by the same grief, the same regret, and the same hope that somehow they could find a way to rebuild the broken pieces of their lives. As the night grew darker, Iremide whispered into the silence, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to her. Father, I promise. Damola nodded, his eyes filled with tears. We both will. And so, in the dim light of their small humble home, Iremide and Damola began the painful journey towards redemption, knowing that nothing could ever bring Joke back, but that her love and sacrifice would forever live in their hearts. The lesson to be learned from this story is that love, Loyalty and sacrifice are far more valuable than material wealth, status, or societal approval. Iremide and Damola both fell into the trap of chasing after a life of luxury, neglecting the deep and unconditional love Joke offered them. In the end, they realized that no amount of wealth or external validation could replace the bond of family and the sacrifices made out of love. The story teaches us to cherish those who truly love us, even when they don't have the riches or glamour that the world seems to idolize. It highlights the importance of gratitude, humility, and the dangers of abandoning one's values and loved ones in the pursuit of superficial gains. At the heart of it all, the story reminds us that true wealth lies in the people who stand by us, not in the material possessions we acquire. By the time Iremide and Damola realized this, it was too late to fully make amends, but the love Joke had for them was so powerful that it extended even beyond her life. It's a painful reminder that we must value and care for our loved ones while we still have them, as some mistakes cannot be undone. I hope you enjoyed the story.